Robert Poole is a partner at Corporate Value Associates. It's a global strategy consulting firm, and he's going to outline strategies to stimulate fresh produce demand on the back of the Australian campaign, Just One More Serve. Pretty self-explanatory, pretty cool strategy. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Robert to the stage.
Hi everyone, still good morning. I got to have dinner with the growers last night, and so I'm very good at being told what to do, so I'm going to do exactly what they told me to do. That is not be boring and make this really interesting, compelling talk. So Anna, my main kind of public speaking sponsors up the back there. I grew up in a little town in northern Victoria, about 3 hours out of Melbourne, and it only had one pub. And as soon as you're 18, that's where you go. In fact, maybe even before you're 18 in some cases. There's a publican there, Tony his name was, and he told me a story, and I've been dying to tell it at a conference since 30 years since he told me, so I'm going to tell it, but I'll be quick. And also, I don't want you to come up to me after this and say, oh, that was such a great story, and forget what I'm about to say about Plus One Serve. So that's the deal that I have with you, is come up to me after the talk and say, Robert, Plus One Serve is an amazing initiative, let's make it happen in New Zealand. And the story was funny too. So for those in the room, who most of you I can tell, without insulting any of you, you'd understand there was a very famous musician called Joe Cocker. And Tony the publican is from Darwin. So for those of you who know Darwin, it's a pretty unusual town. It's isolated, it's in the tropics. And you can imagine, I think this was about 1970. This is a very long time ago. And Joe, as you know, had, again, I don't think I'm speaking out of school, Joe had a substance abuse issue, especially at that time. I think he got over it later. He's obviously left us now. But Joe got into Darwin to do a concert, so he stood up in Darwin and he looked out at the audience who were ready to go with Joe, and they were all wearing their blue singlets and they had their Darwin stubbies in their hand, and Joe, who was no doubt under the influence, came out onto the stage and he uttered maybe some of the most famous words. So what he said was, "It's great to be here in New Zealand." Apparently absolutely true. So it is great to be here in New Zealand. That's my segue via Joe Cocker. I only wasted 3 minutes, Michael, on that story. I'm going to talk to you about the Plus One Serve initiative. Michael and Lucy from AusVeg are effectively the owners and sponsors of the project, so thanks for letting me talk about it. I've done a lot of the research behind the project, and Justine, who runs the project, would love to be here, but she's an apology. And thanks to Anthony and Vegetables New Zealand and Andrew for, I think it was a year ago probably, that we targeted talking at this conference. So the first message to get across that I think we've done well, Michael, in terms of designing the program, is we've created a sense of urgency, and we've done some foundational research, made an investment. So we've established a burning platform. It's fact-based. It's on the basis of a few main reports. The one that I authored was called Shifting the Dial. We did it just after COVID, and this was really to check what had happened during COVID, because obviously it was a very unusual time, particularly in my city in Melbourne. And obviously the results that came out of it are extraordinarily negative, I guess you'd say, in terms of what Australians are eating. And as you can see there, only 7% of adults and 6% of kids are eating their recommended 5 serves a day. 91% of Australians, in other words, are not having enough. And a very large percentage of people are not eating any vegetables at all. So that was the initial kind of, we have a crisis, and even that we presented into Hort Innovation, back into AusVeg, and that got us moving in terms of getting plus one serve formally moving forward. The scale of increasing it even by plus one serve is pretty huge. So the claimed consumption, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute, it was at around 2.4 serves per day. So if you increased it by plus one serve, that's the equivalent of 9 billion serves. It's the equivalent of making the industry about, what, 50, 60% bigger. So it's extraordinary, just adding one serve is an extraordinary amount of vegetables that we would, A, grow the industry by, and B, provide into a healthier, more balanced diet. The team had already done a great job in forming collaboration and bringing the industry along. That started with something called the Fruit and Vegetable Consortium, Michael, and that already existed. AusVeg was a major sponsor of that, along with Nutrition Australia and a lot of other companies. But obviously, Anthony, one of the lessons for us here in NZ is that it's a broad sector, it's a broad church, and to genuinely shift something so huge, so take such a big shift in an industry, it's very multi-layered, and particularly in retail, as I'll talk about in a minute. But the segments, Michael, that have come together here is everything from the growers themselves, the big retailers, the government health agencies, the other government departments, and the research institutions, just to name the big ones, Anthony, that have to come together in. So plus one serve actually came out of the Fruit and Vegetable Consortium. We then started the actual strategy itself, and this was levy funded by industry. So just to keep putting it back into context, that Hort Innovation and the levy started to fund this work. So we went and looked at what true consumption was, and I did that work as well, so I can talk to you about that. We looked all around the world to see what interventions had worked the best in terms of getting people to eat more veggies. We built a national behaviour change framework, and I'll show you what that is. We did the numbers, so Anthony, it's always good to say government or industry, if you invest in this, and I'll show you those numbers as well, and that included the economic impact. So, you know, trying to build that picture that we created the burning platform, we then went and did the kind of the base work. So here's what the numbers turned out to be. If we got to plus one serve by 2030, there's two huge beneficiaries of that. One are the growers themselves, and most of the benefits flowed to growers in the form of increased demand. And as you know, Australia is essentially a domestic industry, so it's about $3.3 billion benefit to growers in that 7-year period. We'd create 13,000 jobs, and we'd also save about $1.4 billion in the health system. That was primarily modelled around the big 4 or 5 disease burdens that we have: heart disease, diabetes, cancer. So at a 12 to 1, I don't think, Anthony, in my life, you know, that's one of the higher returning investment projects. Normally in R&D, if you're getting 2, 3 to 1, you're lucky. So this is a really big payoff if you can make it work. There is an R&D component to this. It's probably not as big a component as it is in doing a lot of other things in the horticulture sector or the vegetable sector, but there is some baseline research that still needs to be done. So it is about getting a research agenda as well as a practical implementation agenda that's quite close to market and you know, or, as I say, most importantly, activated in retail, but also in other settings as well. So the research and development agenda came through Hort Innovation and AusVeg, and we then started to formalise the scale up and roll out of Plus One Serve, of which Michael and Lucy are technically the project owners at AusVeg. And those core stakeholders you can see down the bottom. And I didn't mention organisations, Anthony, like private health funds. Now, they're a very interested stakeholder in terms of preventative medicine. And I just wanted to mention the stats on preventative health because the stats on preventative health in Australia are slightly concerning. We spend about $140 a person on preventative health in Australia, which is 1%, I think, of the health budget. So only 1% of the health budget in Australia is going to preventative health. OECD is 3 to 4%. So, I think, Anthony, the target for Australia and New Zealand should be to get the preventative health budget back up towards 3 to 4%. So that's a huge change. It's more like $500 a person, and vegetables could play a huge role in that preventative health campaign. This is a bit too busy, but we basically built the strategy, and I think the next slide is probably better to see the framework. So hopefully you can read that okay. The top line is the types of interventions that we can have. So, and the side is the barriers that we found. Now, in shifting the dial, clearly the number one barrier was perceived value. 75% of people said they didn't buy veggies because they were too expensive. So that, Michael, informed our number one target, which is to change the value perception of vegetables in retail. The second thing they said is they thought they would throw them out. So the whole, shelf life preservation, waste agenda, and I think it's roughly 25% of veggies are thrown out at home. Now that rolls straight into the value question. You could say that it's also slightly an environmental concern that people have, but I think the psychology of the consumer is that they go into the supermarket and they look to buy something, particularly in the loose veg area, and they say, no, I'm only going to throw that out, and they pass it by. So perceived that it's expensive, they're worried they're going to throw it out. Then the third one that rated highly was convenience, and just the lifestyle choices that people make now, and wanting something that's easy to use and easy to prepare. So they were the main frameworks, and then across the top we've got the policy, communication, education, products and services, the food environment restructuring, which is actually the in-store environment and how the consumer interacts with the product primarily in-store. So that might be from how you interact online, where vegetables are placed on gondola ends and in checkouts, and how the category is managed. And talking to the growers last night, and talking to Anthony, this is very much about a category strategy. I'm not sure if there's retailers. Is Woolies here? Hi, Woolies. So we need to talk Woolies' language. We want to grow the category. We want to grow value in the category. Yes, there's a sustainability benefit that they're really keen on as well, but ultimately the language of the retailer is let's make this category better. Let's create value in that category. And I think I was talking to Michael, if you looked at Cherry and Truss and how Cherry and Truss tomatoes came in, innovative product. Yes, they took a lot of the field supply, but they also grew the whole category, and I'm sure, it's a great product to sell year round. So we do need category development in terms of the product, but we also need category development in terms of the consumer messages, value, convenience, and ease. And the final one is the value question. particularly there we're moving towards per serve pricing, moving away from per kilogram, and I'll show an example of that in a minute. Again, referring to the grocery retailers, we must overemphasise the strategy in retail. When you strip out prepared potatoes, so potato chips in other words, about 85% of veggies are consumed through the retailer and then in the home. So veggies over-indexes in, you think about it at food service. If you go to the fast service, the QSR restaurants, you're not getting any veggies. If you get to a restaurant, maybe you'll have some veggies, but even that portion is often low. So most of the veggies are purchased at retail and then consumed at home. So we have to over-index, and remember, we're not doing a 2-year project to get 100 homes. We're literally trying to get every single person in New Zealand to eat one more serve, or every single person in Australia. So that's much more akin to, what was it called here? Was it called slip, slop, slap here? So it's much more akin to slip, slop, slap. It's much more akin to the seatbelt campaign and road safety. Do not think about this as a 2-year, $500,000 project. This is forever shifting New Zealanders from not eating enough veggies to eating not even still enough, but one more serve. So, we have to shift. The agriculture industries have got far too project orientated, and they're not logical enough in terms of the longer term paradigm shifts of going from a very negative paradigm now around veggies to something that's way better. And obviously that's not our fault necessarily, because kids aren't active enough and kids aren't eating enough, and the whole of society has massively changed. So we've got to turn this around, turn it around urgently, for the 2 reasons of we need demand from a vegetable industry perspective, and we need to help the health of New Zealanders. We looked at projects around the world. We've been quite careful to look at the best things they're doing. Peas Please is one that's we've looked at it in England and the UK, so we've certainly taken parts of that. We want to be very successful and more successful even than that one. Interestingly enough, with that one, Anthony, it's funded by the National Lottery. We do need to think about how to put hundreds of millions of dollars into this project. Again, to re-emphasise my point, this is not a $500,000 project. This is I think the numbers we've got in our forward estimates is $300 million. So, I know that might shock you, but this is an extraordinarily big project that we're looking to do. So interesting, Peas Please is funded by the National Lottery. It also involves a lot of pledges from the retailers in the UK as well. In America, they've started to look at linking it to the health system. So almost like food for medicine, and I think you can get vouchers to use almost through your doctor that link back to buying vegetables. We need to move into gamification, and there's been some gamification in Australia through Coles and Woolies and linking to veggie consumption. We need to link it to the loyalty programs, and there's examples globally where as you build loyalty points, those loyalty points, Anthony, convert to vegetable consumption. So, you don't get a toaster, but you get to buy veggies. So they're the things that we need to talk to Woolies about, and Coles about, and others about, in terms of these great examples globally of how to increase consumption. But you can see it's very category thinking, it's very retail thinking. If we don't think like that, we'll never ever get +1 serve. It just won't work. So this is a slide that I really like. It's showing how the value perception is starting to change already. We're not asking Woolies to do stuff that you're not already doing. So what have we got there? So so this is an example of capsicums. At the moment, if you just went and bought them per kilo, the perceived price that some people might have is $8.90. And if you then start to sell, if you go onto Woolies online, great initiative, Woolies online, that they're selling for per item, so they're selling at $2.23. Again, instantly you get a sense that the thing's better value. If you go to Coles online, they've approximated a average size capsicum, I think it would be, at 220 grams, so that's at $1.96. Ritchie's is going to per 100 grams, and they're going to per serve, which is 75 grams, so Ritchie's would be at 67 cents as a ticketing on, and that work is already done in Ritchie's in Australia, which is one of the big IGAs, and if you went to per 100 grams, which is a common, it's at 89 cents. So the evidence, Ritchie's teamed up with Monash Uni. The evidence is really good that this starts to shift the dial, Anthony, and this. So this is systemic for our Woolies friend. This is we would like this in every store. We'd like this in every store in NZ. We want, this is the kind of shift that we have to have. We're not thinking about little stuff here. We're thinking about structural, fundamental changes in every single supermarket in NZ. It's a very different way to think about it to get successful. Michael and Lucy and Justine have started to set up Plus One Serve itself. So the kind of structure of this, Anthony, is what we could think about here. It's got the universities. We're looking at major funding partners, so using the lottery example, but also the big retailers and other big parties, Medibank Private, those companies that we think could provide really big amounts of money, because it does include a lot of money. And from the retailers, that might be primarily what you guys continue to do and are already doing. I'm not talking about you giving us cash here. This is about working side by side on projects, basically, major initiatives. And then you've got the health departments, governments, what we call the Vegetable Consumption Collective, and there'll be delivery partners as well. So this is well and truly up and running now. It's been going for what, Michael? About 6 months now. So it's just started. The brand is now out there. There was a multi-million-dollar outdoor advertising campaign, which I think was in the order of 5 or 6 million, I think, in value, something like that. So it's at 10 million in value. So again, we're starting to try and get really big amounts of money into this initiative. So the brand strategy is already starting to roll out. And, I guess the $64,000 question is, can we do this here? So the kind of core messages from me is, and I've spoken to Anthony many times, establish the burning platform. One gap in New Zealand is data and measurement, because we were fortunate when we started to do this that we had really good data. We had good national production data. We used a lot of Nielsen data, so we could be very accurate with current consumption, which we've revised down to 1.8 serves per day after we take waste into account. And so we've got a really good measurement. We've got a really good handle on where veggies are consumed, where they're not, and what it is. So I've talked to Anthony about the national data plan for this. The national strategy, I think there's elements you could fast track, Anthony, in terms of building the strategy, and then obviously getting into collective effort and co-design. So I think the most successful programs at the very big end with the likes of the retailers will be, we do have to be cognizant of what we have as the ACCC, so competition laws and things like that. It won't be an issue for any of this, but probably it will involve working with retailers one-on-one, and then working with things like health departments and others. But big partnerships is the designed approach. and then continuing to do those sort of funding and initiatives into time. I've done pretty well. I've got five minutes to go, so I hope the content overrode that incredible story I told you at the intro. You'll never look at Joe Cocker. I don't think Joe Cocker made it to New Zealand. I'm not sure he was even going to his. It may not have even been on his tour schedule. Who knows? So, just before I take a few, I'm not sure if I'm taking questions or not, but just keep in mind the extraordinary nature of this. It's much more like slip, slop, slap and seatbelts than it is like doing a little industry project. It's just, if you think of it like an industry project, we won't even get 0.1 of a serve, let alone plus one serve. It has to be an extraordinary paradigm shift in societal behaviour. So I hope that makes sense, and if we've got time, I'll take a few questions. Yes, Anthony, of course. What did I forget to say?
Well, nothing, but I thought I'd introduce myself because I was headlined all through that. Stand up, Michael and Lucy. Stand up, Michael and Lucy. So this is AusVeg. They're all here to support this program, and obviously what I'd like is some questions. To get to where we got to now today, when did you start?
So the question was, where did we start? Where do you start?
No, when?
When?
Was it 3 years ago?
Yeah, Michael can.
AusVeg actually partnered with Nutrition Australia on the Fruit and Vegetable Consortium that Rob touched on a bit earlier, which started pre-COVID, but I guess the urgency and then the evolution of this +1 serve started probably 3 to 3.5 years ago with some of the early reports and analysis that Rob mentioned early in that presentation. And in the last 12 months, I guess, is when we've been able to unlock some R&D funding through our levy system to kind of resource up, bring in the partnerships and different organisations in those different quadrants that Rob showed earlier around, commercial players, the research institutions, state and territory health and wellness organisations and the like. And now we're getting to the really pointy end where over the next few months we're going to be launching what the slip, slop, slap public-facing kind of message will be.
Yeah, and I think if Michelle and Justine were here, they'd say that the education and health component has largely been state government department health driven, particularly in schools. But the problem with that, without being critical at all with what they do, it actually hasn't shifted the dial. We have to go into retail. So that paradigm of working with school kids and doing sort of 1-2 year programs, feels good, but it unfortunately doesn't work. Yeah.
Before I hand over the mic, as a recommendation for the coalition and the willing, those first few people you need to get on board first, what would you suggest?
Well, obviously I've overemphasised the retailers because of my strong desire that if we're going to win at this, we have to work with them because they'll get to every single New Zealander. I think the government, because of that preventative health spend, we need to build a really strong case, Anthony, to get the government on board, and then maybe some major benefactors that are willing to back and I'm not talking with a few 100,000, but people, even charities and things that might want to put 10, 20, 50 million dollars into something of this scale. So that's where we're heading. Thank you. Great to be here in New Zealand.